As a passenger in a motor vehicle, do you have an obligation to identify yourself to police? And conversely, do police have the authority to demand that you identify yourself? Today we'll have a look at this question on Don't Talk TV. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. Recently, I received an email from a viewer asking me the question, if you're a passenger in a motor vehicle that's been stopped by police, can police ask you for identification, and do you have to give them identification? So I'm going to take a look at that today. The short answer is generally no, you do not have to, and generally no, police do not have the authority to ask you for identification. Now, this is always going to depend slightly on the specifics of the situation, but given your average scenario where the police pull over the driver for a Highway Traffic Act infringement and then just go on a fishing expedition asking the passengers for their identification where they have no reason to suspect those passengers are involved in anything untoward, that will be considered an unlawful search. Now, this has been considered by the Superior Court of Ontario and the Court of Appeal for Ontario, so let's take a look at those cases, and they'll take us through the legal analysis on this and demonstrate why you have the right to remain silent, which includes not identifying yourself if you're the passenger in a motor vehicle. So the first case I have here is from the Superior Court of Justice, Her Majesty the Queen and Pinto. And it's a 2003 decision. As always, I'll put a link to this in the show description below. So just a quick factual background of paragraph 7 indicates that on July the 9th, 2002, the accused, Mr. Pinto, attended Peel Regional Police Service, 22 Division Brantford. He has no driver's license and does not drive. His friend, Victor Ruwanga, driving his black Honda, gave the accused a ride to the police facility. On returning to his friend's vehicle, the two set out for a musical audition in Toronto. Mr. Rurangwa pulled onto Highway number 10 southbound. Mr. Pinto and Mr. Rurangwa testified that the Honda stereo was not playing loudly. They were ultimately pulled over by police because the officer felt that the music coming from the vehicle was excessively loud. And here at paragraph 18, according to the officer's testimony, he stopped the Honda, explained to the Honda occupants the reason for the stop with regards to the music, and then questioned both of them to produce identification. Mr. Pinto ended up being charged with assault police officer for a scuffle that ensued. Let's go forward to paragraph 51, where the court does its analysis of, is demanding identification a search? And do the police have the right to do that for a passenger? So it says here that a request for information or identification documentation from a vehicle passenger amounts to a search or seizure within the meaning of Section 8 of the Charter. An otherwise lawful traffic stop does not and cannot constitute a general search warrant for searching every vehicle, driver, and passenger that is pulled over, citing a Supreme Court decision, Mellenthin. The court then went on to say, paragraph 52, that unless the prosecution can establish legally valid consent on Mr. Pinto's part to respond to questions and to produce identification, there exists no lawful authority in the context of the circumstance of this traffic stop to compel answers and identify production. It goes on to say, paragraph 55, Matthew Pinto was entitled to sit in the front passenger seat of the Honda and be left alone while the car's driver was processed in some fashion for the alleged Section 75 sub 4 Highway Traffic Act violation. That's the loud music. In a lawful traffic stop, as a general rule, a vehicle passenger cannot be subjected to non-consensual dragnet or general investigative questioning or identification production. So Mr. Pinto's charge was ultimately dismissed because the police were not in the lawful execution of their duty, and therefore it wasn't an assault police officer. And I think the court was very clear about why you're not required to provide police identification as a passenger. You're allowed to just sit there and mind your own business. Now let's look at an Ontario Court of Appeal case, this one from 2007. That's Her Majesty the Queen and Harris. So the facts on this one are that Milton Harris was a passenger in a motor vehicle stopped by the police after the driver failed to signal a left turn. The officer asked all of the occupants, including Harris, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, to identify themselves. So they did so. Officer ran them on CPIC, and it turned out that Mr. Harris had a term of bail, which required him to abide by a curfew. So he was charged for breaching his curfew. However, the Court of Appeal looked at, did the request to Mr. Harris for identification infringe Section 8 of the Charter? And again, that's your right to be secure from unreasonable search and seizure. So the Section 8 of the Charter protects against unreasonable searches or seizures. A seizure is a non-consensual taking by a state agent of anything in which the person asserting a Section 8 right has a reasonable expectation of privacy. The thing taken may be tangible or intangible. Information can be seized. At its most fundamental, Section 8 preserves an individual's zone of privacy against state intrusion. The state can enter into that zone if the intrusion meets a reasonableness standard. And then the court just confirmed that the receipt of information by police is a non-consensual taking of that information from the detained person. So asking for identification is clearly a search. Now the question is it a reasonable search to ask a passenger for their identification? Paragraph 40 of this decision says that a person under police detention who is being asked to incriminate himself has more than a reasonable expectation of privacy with respect to the answers to any questions that are put to him by the police. That person has a right to silence unless he or she makes an informed decision to waive that right and provide the requested information to the police. And the court found that in this case, the seizure was unreasonable. As in Supreme Court cases Mellenthin, the officer here, Constable Lipkiss, had no reason to suspect Harris of anything when he questioned him and requested his identification. The purpose for the stop and the consequential detention of Harris and the other occupants of the vehicle had nothing to do with the request for Harris's identification. The purpose of the stop did not justify an at-large inquiry into Harris's background or his status in the criminal justice system. So as a result, Mr. Harris had his breach of curfew charge thrown out because the police only discovered that breach of curfew by violating his rights. So seeing these two cases, I think you can clearly see that you have the right to remain silent, and it's an unreasonable search for police to demand identification from a passenger. Now, as a practical question, what do you do when an officer is demanding your ID? They can't do it legally. They should know that they can't do it legally, but it's going to be a practical decision of how difficult you want to make your day by fighting with police and refusing to give this identification. You can always try calling a lawyer, such as myself or another lawyer. That might help if you can put the lawyer on speakerphone. It might also make the officer even more upset. So it's a bit of a difficult call that'll depend on the situation. I certainly don't want to see a situation where an individual gets charged with resist arrest or even gets beaten up by police. But just keep in mind that you do have the right to remain silent. Always be respectful and polite to police. You can tell them that you are exercising your right to remain silent, and that in your view they don't have the right to demand your identification in a respectful manner. I always recommend that you take that course in dealing with police. This video isn't legal advice. If you need legal advice, contact a lawyer. You can call myself or another lawyer and we can give you advice specifically tailored to the situation you find yourself in. And if there's topics you'd like to see me cover on this channel, please leave a comment in the comment section below or send an email to the email address listed below. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and following us on social media.